He stood there, rifle trembling in his hands, watching his best friend through the scope. The order was clear: shoot the deserter. But how do you kill the man who saved your life just 3 days ago? You think you know what honor means until you're forced to choose between duty and humanity. Private James Mitchell had enlisted at 17, lying about his age like thousands of others. The recruiting officer knew. They all knew. But America needed bodies for the war machine grinding through Europe in 1944. The pen had hesitated over his application for just a moment before signing. That hesitation was the last mercy anyone would show him for 2 years. Now at 19, he was older than most men twice his age. The rain fell hard that October morning in the Hürtgen forest. German artillery had been pounding their position for 6 straight hours. The trees, those ancient guardians of the German frontier, exploded into splinters with each impact. Wood became shrapnel. Earth became graves. Men became memories. Half his unit was gone. The other half wished they were. The forest floor was carpeted with pine needles, fallen branches, and the detritus of war, spent casings, torn uniforms, photographs that would never reach home. Every step was a reminder of those who'd taken their last ones here. The Hürtgen had earned its nickname, the Death Factory. It processed men with mechanical efficiency, turning boys from Iowa and Texas and New York into statistics for the morning. Reports. That's when Corporal Danny Rodriguez made his decision. "I'm done, Jimmy," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant thunder of 88mm shells. His hands shook as he packed his few belongings: a rosary from his mother, letters from his sister, a photograph worn soft at the edges. "I can't do this anymore, I'm going home." You've never truly understood fear until you've seen it break a brave man. Danny wasn't a coward. 2 Purple Hearts proved that. He'd dragged 3 wounded men to safety under machine gun fire at Anzio. The medal citations didn't mention how he'd cried afterward, hidden in a bombed-out church praying to a God he wasn't sure was listening anymore. He'd held a dying 18-year-old kid in his arms for 2 hours, lying to him about making it home for Christmas. The kid's name was Bobby Summers. He'd wanted to be a baseball player. Danny remembered every detail, every word, every rattling breath. The shells were getting closer now. You could tell by the way the ground shook, the way your teeth rattled in your skull. The Germans had their range. It was only a matter of time before one found their foxhole. Danny had calculated the odds. They all had. Mathematics became theology. In the forest, probability became prayer. "You can't just leave," Jimmy said, though the words felt hollow. What was leaving compared to what they'd already left behind? Their innocence in North Africa, their faith in Sicily, their sanity in Italy. Now their humanity was being stripped away, layer by layer, like bark from these dying trees. But everyone has a breaking point, and Danny had found his in the mud and blood of that cursed forest. The order came down 2 hours after Danny disappeared into the mist. "Private Mitchell, report to Lieutenant Harrison immediately. You know something's wrong when they use your full name, when the runner won't. Meet your eyes. When even the chaplain looks away as you pass." The lieutenant's tent smelled of wet canvas and cigarette smoke. Maps covered every surface, marked with red X's where units used to be. Each X was a platoon, a squad, brothers who'd shared everything, and now shared only the democracy of death. Harrison didn't look up when Jimmy entered. He didn't need to. They both knew why he was there. The lieutenant's hands trembled slightly as he shuffled papers. Not from fear. Harrison had proven his courage a dozen times over. From exhaustion. From the weight of command. From writing too many letters that began with, "We regret to inform you." His desk was covered with half-finished condolence notes, each one a masterpiece of necessary lies. "Your son died bravely. He felt no pain. He spoke of you at the end. Rodriguez was your bunkmate, wasn't he?" "Yes, sir." "You know where he's headed?" Jimmy's throat went dry. Of course he knew. Danny had. Talked about it every night. The old barn near Rotkin. His grandmother's birthplace. She'd fled to America in 1910, but she'd never stopped telling stories about the old country. Danny had memorized every detail from her letters, drawn maps in the dirt with his finger. It was his escape, his meditation, his prayer. When the shelling got bad, he'd close his eyes and recite the landmarks. The stone bridge over the creek, the apple orchard, the barn with the red door that was probably brown by now. "I might have an idea, sir." Harrison finally looked up. His eyes were hollow, aged decades and months. You could see the weight of every order he'd given, every letter he'd written to grieving mothers. He'd been a high school history teacher before. The war. Now he was making history, one dead boy at a time. "Rodriguez is a good soldier," Harrison said slowly. "Was a good soldier. But good soldiers who desert become dangers. They know our positions, our strength, our weaknesses. If the Germans capture him," the implication hung in the air like cordite after a barrage. Danny knew everything: patrol schedules, code words, the planned assault for next week that would probably kill them all anyway. Information that could cost hundreds of lives if it fell into the wrong hands. "I'm giving you a choice, Private. A choice I shouldn't give you." Harrison opened his desk drawer and pulled out a single bullet. Not standard issue. A German round. Untraceable. Deniable. Bring him back alive to face court-martial or... He slid the bullet across the table. "Make sure he doesn't talk if the Germans find him first. He knows too much about our positions." The bullet rolled to a stop against Jimmy's finger. Such a small thing to carry such weight. 7.92 50 Mauser Mauser. He'd dug enough of them out of trees, walls, and bodies to recognize it by touch. "Why me, sir?" "Because you're the only one he won't run from. Because you're the only one who might be able to talk him back." Harrison paused, lighting another cigarette with shaking hands. "And because I know you'll do what needs to be done either way." You never forget the weight of that kind of responsibility. It settles in your stomach like lead, poisoning every thought, every breath, every heartbeat. Jimmy left the command post with the bullet in his pocket and a Colt 45 on his hip. The rain had turned to sleet, each drop a tiny knife against exposed skin. The other soldiers avoided his eyes. Word traveled fast in a unit. Everyone knew where he was going. Everyone was grateful. It wasn't them. He passed the aid station where medics worked on the latest casualties. The lucky ones screamed. The unlucky ones didn't. He passed the field kitchen where Cookie was trying to make something edible out of K rations and rainwater. He passed the Graves registration unit, cataloging the morning's harvest. Dog tags in one pile, personal effects in another. Bodies in rows like cordwood, waiting for burial when the shelling stopped. If it ever stopped. Jimmy found Danny exactly where he knew he would. The barn stood like a ghost against the gray sky, its roof half collapsed from artillery fire. The red door Danny's grandmother had described was indeed brown now, hanging off its hinges like a broken jaw. Danny sat in the corner, his rifle across his lap, staring at a photograph. The barn's interior was a museum of abandonment. Farm tools, rusted on the walls. Hay moldered in the loft. A child's wooden toy horse lay broken in the straw, probably left behind when the family fled, or died. In the Hurtgen, those were often the same thing. "Knew they'd send you," Danny said without looking up. His voice was calm, resigned. The voice of a man who'd made peace with his war. The photograph was of his sister, Maria, 15 years old, standing in front of their family's bakery in Brooklyn. She wore her school uniform and a smile that could light up Times Square. Danny had carried it through North Africa, Sicily, Anzio, and now here. The edges were worn soft from handling, from being touched by hands that had done terrible things trying to get home to the girl in the picture. "She writes every week," Danny continued. "Tells me about school, about the boys who whistle at her, on the street, about how Papa had to hire help because I'm not there to work the ovens. She doesn't know I haven't gotten a letter in 2 months. She doesn't know mail doesn't reach the dead." Jimmy stepped closer, his boots crunching on broken glass. The windows had been blown out weeks ago. Wind whistled through the gaps, carrying the smell of cordite and decay. "How do you convince a man to return to hell when you're not sure you believe in the cause yourself?" "They'll shoot you for this, Danny." They'll shoot me either way, at least this way I choose when. Danny looked up for the first time. His eyes were clear, peaceful, the eyes of a man who'd found his way out of the labyrinth. Did Harrison give you the speech? About duty and honor and the greater good? Something like that. Did he give you a bullet too? Make it look like the Germans did it? Jimmy's hand went instinctively to his pocket. The bullet felt heavier than the pistol on his hip. He's not a bad man, Danny said. None of them are. They're just trying to make sense of something senseless, trying to find meaning in madness. But you know what I realized, Jimmy? Sometimes the only sane response to an insane situation is to refuse to participate. You understand the logic of desperation only when you've lived it. The rain started again, drumming against what remained of the roof. Each drop found its way through the holes, creating tiny rivers in the dirt floor. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled like thunder. German or American. After a while, it didn't matter. Death sounded the same in any language. Remember what you told me at Anzio? Jimmy asked, settling down across from Danny. The straw was damp and smelled of rot, but it was better than the mud outside. When I wanted to run, Danny's laugh was bitter, hollow. I told you heroes don't run. Christ, what a fool I was. Look how that turned out. Martinez is a hero now. Taylor's a hero. Johnson, Smith, fucking Peterson, all heroes, all dead. Martinez had been 22, engaged to a girl named Betty. He'd shown everyone her picture so many times they could describe her from memory. Taylor had been saving money to buy his father's farm. Johnson had twin boys he'd never met. Smith had been writing a novel in his spare time, filling notebook after notebook with stories about anything but war. Peterson had just wanted to make it to his 20th birthday. He'd missed it by 3 days. You saved my life, Jimmy said quietly. And now you're here to end mine. Danny's smile was sad, knowing. It's poetic, really. Almost like the brass planned it that way. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. You think you understand friendship until it asks you to choose between love and duty, until it demands you weigh a life against an order, until it forces you to decide what kind of man you'll be when the uniform comes off, if it ever does. Jimmy sat down properly, his rifle between them like a barrier. Or a bridge. They'd shared everything in this war. Rations when supply lines broke, blankets when winter bit deep, letters from home when one of them hadn't received any, fear when the shells fell too close. That peculiar intimacy that comes from depending on another human being for survival. Tell me about the bakery, Jimmy said. Danny's eyes softened. For a moment, he wasn't a deserter or a soldier. He was just a kid from Brooklyn who missed the smell of fresh bread. Papa wakes up at 4 a.m. every day, has for 30 years, says the bread can tell if you're not fully awake, that it won't rise properly if you don't give it your full attention. Sounds like something a baker would say. He makes the best cannoli in the neighborhood. Mama says it's the secret ingredient, a drop of orange liqueur in the filling. But I think it's the love he puts in every batch, the way he pipes the cream just so, dust them with just the right amount of powdered sugar. He'd let me help sometimes, before. Danny's voice trailed off. Before the war, before everything changed, before it became the only timeline that mattered anymore. It sounds nice, Jimmy offered. It was. It is. Danny's voice cracked. I just want to make it back to taste one more. Is that so wrong? To want to live. To want something beyond this fucking forest and these fucking shells and all this fucking death? How do you answer that? How do you tell a man that wanting to live is the most human thing in the world, but that humanity is the first casualty of war? That the machine needs cogs, not men? That dreams of cannoli and family bakeries are luxuries they can no longer afford? They know about the barn, Danny. If I found you, they'll find you, and if the Germans find you first, let them come. Danny's grip tightened on his rifle. I'm tired of running. Tired of being afraid. Tired of pretending this makes sense. That there's glory in any of this. That we're heroes instead of just boys who got drafted into someone else's argument. What about Maria? What happens to her if you don't come home? Danny's composure finally broke. Tears mixed with rain on his weathered face. The storm had found its way inside, through the roof, through the walls, through the careful defenses he'd built around his heart. In that moment, Jimmy saw every 19-year-old who'd been asked to become a killer for his country. Every son who'd left home a boy and would return a ghost if he returned at all. I'd dream about them, Jimmy. Every face, every name. Danny pulled out a small notebook from his pocket, its pages swollen with rain and tears and the weight of memory. I started writing them down. Everyone we've lost. Everyone who died because of me. You carry the dead with you longer than you carry the living. They don't get heavier over time. You just get weaker from bearing the load. The notebook was filled with careful script, each entry a small obituary. Private Anderson took shrapnel meant for me at Salerno. 19 years old. Wanted to be a teacher. Had a girl named Susan back home. Corporal Williams stepped on a mine outside Rome. 21. Had twin daughters he never met. Sent me their picture once. Beautiful girls. They'll never know how much he loved them. Sergeant Cooper. Stop. No. Someone needs to remember. Them. Someone needs to know they were more than just numbers in a report. More than statistics for the generals to shuffle around their maps. Danny's voice rose, anger breaking through the resignation. Do you know what they call acceptable? Loss is 10%, that's what's acceptable. 1 in 10 of us. As if David Martinez was just a percentage. As if Tom Williams was just a fraction. The artillery had stopped. The silence was worse somehow. In the quiet, you could hear your own thoughts, and those were the most dangerous, enemies of all. In the silence, you could hear the voices of the dead asking why them and not you. Asking what made your life worth more than theirs. Asking questions that had no answers, only guilt. The lieutenant gave me a choice, Jimmy said finally, the words feeling like betrayal. Bring you back alive or make sure I don't talk. Danny finished. Harrison always was practical. It's what makes him a good officer and a terrible human being. Or maybe it's the other way around, I can't tell anymore. This isn't you, Danny, you're not a deserter. You're just human. Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? They need machines, not men. They need us to follow orders without thinking, kill without feeling, die without complaining. And for what? So the maps can change color? So politicians can shake hands over our graves? Danny stood up, pacing now, energy crackling through him like electricity before a strike. You know what the recruiter told me? That I'd be fighting for freedom, for democracy, and maybe somewhere in some boardroom or parliament that's what this is about. But down here in the mud, we're just trying not to die. We're just killing other boys who are trying not to die. German kids who probably had their own recruiters filling their heads with their own noble lies. You understand the system only when you see how easily it breaks good men. When you watch it feed idealists into its machinery and spit out either corpses or killers. When you realize the war's greatest victory isn't capturing territory, but capturing souls. You know what I realized yesterday? Danny continued. I can't remember what my mother's voice sounds like. I can remember every scream, every order, every shell whistle. But I can't remember my mother singing in the kitchen while she cooked. Sunday dinner. What kind of man forgets his mother's voice? Then they heard the voices. German. Close. Too close. You learn that fate has a cruel sense of timing when you're least prepared for it. When you're raw and open and human. That's when the war finds you again. Danny's head snapped toward the sound. A patrol, maybe 4 or 5 soldiers making their way through the forest. Their voices carried on the wind. Young voices laughing about something. Even German soldiers found things to laugh about. Even they were human when the shooting stopped. They'd be at the barn in minutes. Go, Danny whispered urgently. Get out of here. Not without you. Don't be a hero, Jimmy. We've seen where that leads. But Jimmy was already moving, pulling Danny away from the window. They could hear individual voices now, casual conversation. Someone complaining about the rain. Someone else talking about a letter from home. Universal soldier talk. The Germans didn't know they were here. Yet, the root cellar, Danny pointed to a hidden trapdoor partially covered by moldy hay. We can wait them out. They descended into darkness, pulling the door closed above them just as boots echoed on the barn floor. The cellar was cramped, barely big enough for two men. It smelled of earth and decay and fear, that particular cocktail of scents that meant hiding from death. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, each drop counting out the seconds. You discover what trust really means when your life depends on the man beside you, even when that man is supposed to be your enemy. When breathing too loud could kill, you both. When a sneeze or a cough or a shifted foot could bring the war crashing down into your hiding place. German voices filtered through the floorboards. Laughter. They'd found something amusing. Maybe the broken toy horse. Maybe some graffiti left by previous occupants. Danny's hand found Jimmy's in the darkness, squeezing once. A silent message. I'm sorry it came to this. Or maybe, thank you for not leaving me. Or perhaps simply, we're in this together now. The Germans were exploring the barn methodically. Professional soldiers doing their job, just like Jimmy and Danny had done theirs so many times. Checking corners, looking for supplies, searching for any sign of the enemy. The irony wasn't lost. Two American soldiers hiding from Germans in a barn Danny's German grandmother had told him about. War made borders meaningless and ancestry irrelevant. Minutes stretched like hours. Jimmy could feel Danny's pulse through their clasped hands, rapid at first, then slowing as he controlled his breathing. This is what they'd been trained for. Not the hiding specifically, but the control. The ability to master your body when your mind screamed. The Germans were in no hurry. Why would they be? As far as they knew, this was just another abandoned barn in a forest full of them. One of them sat down directly above the cellar door. They could hear him unwrapping something. Food, probably. The crinkle of paper. The satisfied sigh of a man getting off his feet. He was maybe 3 feet away, separated by old wood and older prayers. Then Jimmy felt Danny tense beside him. More footsteps directly overhead. A pause. Silence that stretched like a held breath. Had they noticed something? The disturbed dust? A footprint? The way the hay didn't lie quite naturally over the trapdoor? Wood creaked. Someone was kneeling. Fingers scraped against the floor, finding the edge of the door. Danny's hand tightened on Jimmy's. This was it. The moment when everything would change. When they'd have to choose between surrender and slaughter. Between becoming prisoners and becoming killers. Again. The trapdoor started to open. In that split second, everything crystallized. Time dilated the way it does in combat. Each heartbeat an hour. Each thought a lightning strike of possibility and consequence. You make your choice not when you have time to think, but when thinking would cost lives. When instinct and training and the primitive need to survive override everything civilization tried to teach you. Jimmy erupted from the cellar, rifle firing. The first German fell backward, surprise frozen on his young face. Too young. They were all too young. Danny was right behind him, moving with the instinct drilled into them through months of combat. Muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. The barn became a slaughterhouse. 4 Germans, 2 Americans. Seconds that felt like hours. Muzzle flashes in the dim light. The sharp crack of rifles. The duller thud of bodies hitting the ground. Straw dancing in the air, caught in the crossfire. Blood mixing with rainwater on the old wooden floor. When the smoke cleared, Jimmy stood over the body of a German soldier who couldn't have been older than 16. The boy's eyes stared at nothing, his hand still reaching for a rifle he'd never fire. Never go home. Never see whatever German equivalent of Maria waited for him somewhere east of here. He was going to surrender, Danny said quietly, his voice hollow. I saw it in his eyes. He was going to surrender. The boy's weapon was still slung on his shoulder. His hands had been raising, but not to fight, to show they were empty, to make the universal gesture of enough. But training is faster than mercy. Bullets are quicker than second thoughts. You learn that survival makes killers of us all, willing or not. that the gap between soldier and murderer is measured in milliseconds and interpreted through smoke. They stood among the bodies, the weight of what they'd done settling like lead in their stomachs. 5 more for Danny's notebook. 5 more names they'd never know. Families they'd never be able to apologize to. Stories that ended mid-sentence in a barn that had seen too much death already. Danny walked to each German soldier, closing their eyes, whispering something that might have been a prayer, or an apology, or just an acknowledgement that they'd been men too. One had a wedding ring. Another carried a book of poetry in his breast pocket, the pages now soaked with blood. The youngest, the one who'd tried to surrender, had chocolate in his pocket, the same kind Jimmy's mother sent from home. Now we're both deserters, Danny said. Both murderers. They would have killed us. Maybe, maybe not. We'll never know now, will we? Danny knelt beside the boy, adjusting his collar with gentle hands, making him presentable for whatever came next. He probably had a mother who told him to be brave, a father who said to do his duty, maybe a girl who promised to wait, just like us. The gunfire would bring others, American or German. It didn't matter now. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They were no longer soldiers who'd fled. They were soldiers who'd killed and fled. The distinction mattered in ways that would echo through whatever time they had left. We need to move, Jimmy said, though his legs felt like stone. Where? Back to face a firing squad? Forward to be shot as spies? Danny stood, looking older than his 20 years. You realize what we've done? We're enemies of everyone now, too. American for the Germans. Too corrupted for the Americans. Together. We go together or not at all. Danny looked at him for a long moment. In his eyes, Jimmy saw gratitude, fear, resignation, and something else. Hope, or just the recognition that some bonds are stronger than war, stronger than duty, stronger than the fear of death itself. The acknowledgement that they'd moved beyond the roles of deserter and pursuer into something else. Brothers in damnation, perhaps. Partners in a crime that might have been survival or might have been murder, depending on who wrote the history. Together, Danny agreed. Until the end. They moved through the forest like ghosts, avoiding patrols from both sides. The Hurtgen had become their universe, every tree a potential enemy, every sound a threat. They'd grown up in this forest in all the ways that mattered. Learned to kill in it, learned to die in it. Now they were learning to be outlaws in it. You find clarity in the most desperate moments when all pretense falls away. When you're stripped down to the essential question, what are you willing to do to keep breathing? What are you willing to become? They found shelter in a shell crater filled with rainwater and the detritus of previous battles. Someone's helmet served as a cup. An abandoned medical kit provided bandages for cuts they didn't remember getting. The crater was fresh. The earth still smelled of cordite and fear. Why? Danny asked as they rested, sharing body heat against the cold. Why didn't you follow orders? Jimmy thought about it, about Lieutenant Harrison's hollow eyes, about the bullet still in his pocket, heavier than ever, about all the choices that led to this moment, small compromises that had seemed reasonable at the time, following orders that made him uncomfortable, staying quiet when he should have spoken up, becoming piece by piece the soldier they needed him to be. Because I remembered what you told me about your father's bakery, about the extra ingredient, being love. Jimmy pulled out his own photograph, his kid sister on her birthday, cake smeared on her face, grinning at the camera. Maybe that's what we forgot in all this, the love that makes us human. Love doesn't stop bullets, no, but neither does following orders. Martinez followed orders. Williams followed orders. They're just as dead as if they'd run. Jimmy tucked the photo away carefully. At least this way we die as ourselves. They shared the last of Jimmy's rations, a chocolate bar he'd been saving for 3 weeks. It tasted like home and heartbreak and the last meal of condemned men. The chocolate was American, stolen from some supply dump. They ate it slowly, making it last, knowing it might be their last taste of sweetness. What do you think they'll say about us? Danny asked, in the reports, in the letters home. That we were cowards. that we betrayed our country, that we deserved what we got. And what did we get? Jimmy looked at his friend, really looked at him, saw past the uniform, past the fear, past everything that war had made them into. Saw the kid from Brooklyn who just wanted to taste his father's cannoli one more time. The boy who'd saved lives and taken them. The man who'd reached his limit and chosen humanity over duty. Each other. We got each other. You understand brotherhood not through shared victory, but through shared damnation. Through the recognition that you've both been broken by the same machine and chosen to walk away together rather than let it grind you to nothing alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky the color of blood and fire. Somewhere their units were preparing for another assault. Men they'd called brothers would die tonight. Others would live to carry the guilt. The war would go on with or without them. The machine would find new cogs to replace the broken ones. I need to tell you something, Danny said, about why I really ran, about what finally broke me. I killed a kid, Jimmy. Younger than that German in the barn. Danny's voice was steady now, like he'd rehearsed this confession 1,000 times, in his mind. Like he'd been carrying it so long it had worn smooth edges into his soul. You think you know someone until they share their deepest wound. Until they trust you with the thing that broke them. It was 3 weeks ago. House-to-house fighting in some village I can't even pronounce. We'd been taking fire all morning. Lost 2 guys to a sniper. Everyone was on edge. Danny stared at his hands as he spoke, seeing blood that had long since washed away. I kicked in a door, saw movement, fired. Perfect training. Perfect execution. 3 rounds center mass, just like they taught us. He paused, his hands trembling slightly. The warrior's hands that had been so steady in combat shook at the memory. It was a boy, maybe 12. He was holding a broom, not a rifle. The light was bad. I was scared. I killed a child who was trying to clean his family's kitchen. The weight of it hung between them. How many others carried similar secrets? How many perfect soldiers were broken men pretending to be whole? How many heroes were just people who'd learned to live with what they'd done? His mother found him. I was still standing there trying to understand what I'd done. She didn't scream at first, just made this sound, like all the air had been pulled out of the world. Like gravity had reversed. I hear it every night, every single night. It wasn't your fault. Whose fault was it then? Hitler's, Roosevelt's, God's. Danny's laugh was sharp, bitter. I pulled the trigger. I ended a life that had barely begun. And for what? So we could take a house we'd lose the next day? So some general could put another pin in his map? Danny pulled out another photograph. Not his sister this time. A boy. Dark-haired, serious-looking. School photo by the look of it. I went back. After we retook the village, found his room. His name was Friedrich. He liked to draw. Had pictures of planes all over his walls. Wanted to be a pilot. Danny's voice broke. I took this to remember. To remind myself what I'd become. What this war had made me. You realize some wounds don't heal? They just teach you to walk differently, to carry yourself around the hole in your soul. That's why I couldn't do it anymore. Every shadow could be another child. Every door could hide another Friedrich. Every order could make me a monster again. Danny looked at the photo one more time before tucking it away next to his sister's. I'd rather die as Danny Rodriguez from Brooklyn than live as the man who kills children. They heard engines in the distance, vehicles approaching from multiple directions. The net was closing. Their time was running out. The forest that had sheltered them was becoming a trap. They're coming, Jimmy said. I know. Danny checked his rifle one last time. Old habits. Both sides from the sound of it. We could still run. Try to make it to Switzerland. Disappear. Danny shook his head. I'm tired of running. From the Germans. From our own army. From myself. He looked at Jimmy with eyes that had seen too much. But you should go. You followed your conscience. That's not a crime. Everything we've done today is a crime, in their eyes anyway. Then maybe it's time to stop seeing through their eyes. Danny stood, straightening his uniform with practiced movements. Maybe it's time to stop letting them Define what honor means, what duty means, what it means to be a man. The engines were getting closer. They could make out individual vehicles now. American Shermans from the west, German vehicles from the east. Two armies converging on two men who'd stepped outside the rules. The hammer and the anvil, with them as the metal to be shaped or shattered. "Whatever happens," Danny said, checking his ammunition one last time, "I want you to know, you gave me back my humanity today, even if it's just for a few more minutes." The vehicles stopped 100 yards away, American and German both responding to the gunfire. In minutes they'd find them. The circle was closing, history preparing to write its verdict on two soldiers who'd chosen conscience over country. You measure courage not by the battles you fight, but by the stands you take when fighting no longer matters, when the outcome is certain and all that's left is choosing how you'll meet it. Danny stood up, straightening his uniform one last time. Even now, even as a deserter, he carried himself like a soldier. Because that's what he was. Not despite his humanity, but because of it. The uniform didn't make the man. The man decided what the uniform meant. "Whatever happens, I want you to know something," Danny said, his voice calm now, peaceful. "You saved me today. Not from death, from dying as someone I'm not. From becoming so lost in this war that I'd never find my way home, even if my body made it back to Brooklyn. Danny, let me finish. That boy in the barn, the one who was going to surrender, we gave him the same chance I never gave Friedrich. A moment of recognition, a chance to be human. That matters. In all this inhumanity, that matters." The soldiers were spreading out, surrounding their position. Orders barked in English and German. Two armies united in hunting two men who'd chosen conscience over compliance. Jimmy could hear Sergeant Patterson's voice among the Americans. He'd been at Anzio too. Seen the same things. Made different choices. "I'm going to stand up," Danny said, hands raised. "Give them a target, you stay down, wait for the chaos, then slip away." "Like hell. This isn't your fight anymore, Jimmy. It's been my fight since you saved my life at Anzio. It'll be my fight until—" The first shot came from the American side, then the German. In seconds, the forest erupted. Two armies firing at shadows at each other, at two men who'd become symbols of everything war feared most. Soldiers who remembered they were human. You learn that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to hate. Refusing to see the enemy as less than human. Refusing to let war take the last thing you have, your ability to choose who you are in your final moments. Jimmy and Danny stood together, weapons down, facing the storm. Not as Americans or deserters, not as heroes or cowards, but as two young men who'd found something worth dying for in the midst of so much death. "Remember the cannoli," Danny said, smiling as bullets filled the air around them. "Tell them the secret ingredient." The forest exploded in fire and sound. Two armies spending ammunition on two men who'd already won their war by refusing to fight. The truth is, war doesn't create heroes. It reveals them. And sometimes, the greatest heroism is choosing love over law, conscience over country, humanity over survival. When the firing stopped, the forest fell silent except for the rain pattering on leaves and the distant rumble of engines. Smoke drifted between the trees like ghosts of all the battles fought in this cursed place. Shell casings littered the ground, brass testimonies to fear and fury. They found them together. Danny Rodriguez died holding the picture of his sister, his body shielding Jimmy's. 3 bullets had found him, one in the shoulder, one in the chest, one that no longer mattered. His eyes were open, staring at something beyond the canopy of broken trees. On his lips, the beginning of a word that might have been home. Jimmy Mitchell died holding his friend, trying to stop blood that wouldn't stop flowing. He'd taken 2 bullets meant for a deserter and found peace in the choosing. His last words, whispered into Danny's unhearing ear, the secret ingredient, was always love. They were found that way hours later, after the armies had spent themselves firing at phantoms and each other in the confusion. 2 young men in American uniforms holding each other like brothers, like sons, like all the things they'd never get to become. The official reports labeled them deserters, cowards, traitors to their country. Lieutenant Harrison wrote that they'd been killed attempting to flee to enemy lines. The German report stated they'd died in a failed attack on a patrol. Both sides needed their version of the truth, their justification for the ammunition expended and the lives lost. But one soldier, who was there that day, saw something different. Private First Class Anthony Russo from Newark had been part of the American unit that responded. He'd seen the way they stood, weapons down, facing death without flinching. He'd seen the photograph clutched in Danny's hand, the protective curve of his body over his friend. In his letter home, written by lamplight in a tent that leaked memories as much as rain, he wrote, "Dear Mom, I saw something today I'll never forget." Two men standing up for each other when the whole world was telling them to get down. They didn't fire a shot at the end, just stood there like they were already someplace else, someplace better than this forest full of dead boys. The brass says, "They were cowards, but I saw their faces." If that's not courage, I don't know what is. Maybe that's what we're all looking for out here. Not a way to die for our country, but a reason to stay human in all this inhumanity. Kiss Pop for me. Tell him I'll be home when I can. Tell him I still remember what matters. Love, Tony. The letter made it past the censors. Sometimes truth is too small to threaten the machine. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at Rodriguez's bakery in Brooklyn. No return address, just Jimmy Mitchell's personal effects, and a note in shaky handwriting. He talked about your cannoli until the end, said the secret ingredient was love. He was right. Maria Rodriguez kept her brother's photograph on the wall of the bakery for 60 years. When customers asked about the young soldier, she'd tell them he died in the war. If they pressed for details, she'd add, "He died being himself." That's all any of us can hope for. She never married, said she was waiting for someone who understood that love was more important than anything else, more important than duty, than country, than even life itself. Someone who would choose conscience over compliance when the moment came. Every October, on the anniversary of that day in the Hurtgen forest, she'd make cannoli using her father's recipe. And every time she'd add an extra drop of orange liqueur and whisper, "For you, Danny, for choosing love." History remembers the generals, the battles, the victories that shaped nations and changed maps. Children learn about Patton and Eisenhower, about D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge. They memorize dates and casualties, and the names of operations that sound like poetry until you understand what they cost. But perhaps the real legacy of war lies in these forgotten moments, when ordinary men choose extraordinary love, when soldiers remember they are brothers first, when the human heart refuses to be conquered even as the body falls. Danny never made it back to taste his father's cannoli, but maybe in those final moments he tasted something sweeter, the knowledge that he'd died as himself, not as what war had tried to make him, that he'd found someone who understood the choice between humanity and survival, that in a forest full of death, he'd made life mean something. Jimmy never saw his sister again, never watched her grow up and have children of her own. But he'd given her something more valuable than his presence, the knowledge that her brother had died for love, not hatred. That when the moment came to choose between following orders and following his heart, he'd chosen the harder path. They rest now in unmarked graves somewhere in Belgium, their exact location lost to time and bureaucracy. But their story lives on in the whispered conversations of soldiers who've reached their breaking point, in the moment when conscience collides with duty, in the recognition that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be brave in the way they demand. You carry their story now, the story of the soldier who chose death over betrayal, not of country, but of conscience, not of duty, but of love. The story of two young men who found redemption in rebellion, who discovered that some things are worth more than survival. Perhaps that's the secret ingredient in all our lives, the love that helps us choose who we are when all the choices seem impossible. The love that says being human is more important than being heroic. The love that whispers even in the thunder of artillery and the screech of orders, "You are more than this uniform, more than this war, more than what they've made you become." Remember them not as deserters, but as boys who found their way home to themselves in a forest designed to make men lose everything. Remember that in the arithmetic of war, where human lives become statistics and conscience becomes liability, they chose a different equation. They chose each other. And in the end, isn't that what we're all fighting for? The right to choose love over fear, conscience over complicity, humanity over the machine that would grind us all to dust? Danny Rodriguez and Jimmy Mitchell died on October 15, 1944, in the Hurtgen Forest. They died holding what mattered most. They died free. Like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. This channel is for those who believe history is made not only by armies, but by individual courage.